The first memories that live in her heart were not of pain, but of the softest afternoons, the scent of warm bread in a little kitchen, and the laughter of her brother echoing down the narrow hallway of a house that no longer stands. Those memories carried her like a candle through storms, and even in the years that followed, when the storms grew harsher, she held them close as if they could still heal every wound. She had always believed that love was a shield, that as long as they had each other, no cruelty of the world could truly break them. But time has a way of testing love, bending it into shapes you never imagined. She was still so young when life decided to take away the comfort of parents, thrusting her and her brother into a new reality. One car crash, one moment of metal against asphalt, and the home filled with warmth became a place haunted by silence. In that silence, her brother became her protector, her only family. She remembered the way he held her hand at the funeral, his palm trembling but strong enough to keep her from collapsing. She remembered the way he whispered, "It's just us now. I promise I won't let you fall." Those words became her anchor, her soft, healing mantra whenever grief threatened to swallow her. Years blurred, and survival became their rhythm. He worked every job he could find, hands calloused, eyes often weary. She watched him age faster than he should have, his shoulders always heavy with invisible burdens. Yet he smiled for her. He told her jokes. He reminded her that somehow, someday, things would get better. She wanted to believe him because belief was easier than despair, and hope was a medicine she could not afford to lose. Still, beneath the surface, cracks spread. He fell into games of chance, into promises of easy money, into shadows that whispered solutions too tempting for a man already drowning. She begged him to stop. Sometimes he swore he would. Sometimes he laughed off her worries with the kind of reckless grin that frightened her more than his silence. And sometimes he simply turned away, carrying a secret fear in his eyes that he would never speak aloud. Through it all, she tried to remain the steady one. She cooked their small meals, stitched torn shirts, lit candles at night when the electricity ran out. She tried to fill their broken world with fragments of gentleness, as if the soft glow of her presence could heal him. And perhaps in some way it did, at least for a while. But storms kept gathering. The debts grew, and with them came shadows at the door, men with cold eyes and harder voices. They did not shout. They did not threaten loudly. They only looked at her too long, too directly, their gazes sharp enough to leave bruises. She shut the door quickly, whispered prayers under her breath, and reminded herself that nothing truly dark could break into their little home if she stayed strong. Still, at night, when the wind howled and her brother paced the floor, she felt the edges of fear carve into her heart. And yet, even in that fear, she found moments of beauty. She remembered one evening when they had nothing left but stale bread. Her brother tore it in half, pushed the larger piece toward her, and smiled as if it were a feast. She wanted to cry, but instead she laughed, and in that laughter the heaviness lifted just enough for them both to breathe. It was in these fragile, imperfect acts of love that her heart continued to heal. Perhaps love, she thought, was not about perfection, but about persistence. About holding someone's hand when the world tried to pull it away. About whispering, "I'm here," even when you had nothing else left to give. Her days stretched long and quiet, filled with small rituals that kept despair at bay. She would sit by the window with a cup of tea she could barely sweeten, listening to the city beyond, imagining lives untouched by hunger or debt. She would close her eyes and dream of a future where she could breathe freely, where her brother no longer carried shame in his shoulders, where her own heart could soften without fear. These dreams were her quiet sanctuary, a healing garden she built inside her mind. And though the world pressed against them, though debts loomed and danger whispered at their door, she believed, she needed to believe, that love was stronger, that somehow, through the cracks, a new light would find them. The days that followed grew heavier, as if someone had quietly turned down the light inside the house. Morning arrived, but it did not feel like morning. It felt like a pause between one worry and the next. She moved through the rooms the way one moves through a church after the service has ended. Softly, respectfully, careful not to disturb the thin hush holding everything together. Her brother slept on the couch most nights, or pretended to. She heard him shift when the pipes knocked, heard the soft clatter of coins he kept counting and recounting, as if numbers could turn into mercy. Sometimes she made tea and set a cup by his elbow. He would lift it with both hands like something precious, sip and stare at the window where the city dimmed to charcoal. He spoke in fragments, about work he might find, about a friend who might help, about a lucky break that felt more rumor than reality. She let him talk. The words, even brittle ones, seemed to ease him. In those quiet hours, she learned the contours of his fear, how it curved around shame, how it hid itself under hope. She wanted to lift it from him, the way one lifts a heavy coat from a loved one's shoulders. She wanted to say, "Give it to me. Let me carry it." Her heart had always been ready like that, a soft, healing place where someone could lay down their burden. But fear, like winter, does not end because you ask it to. It lingers, patient, and then it snows. They began to knock in the afternoons, not just at night, not always the same men. Some of them spoke kindly, as if kindness could disguise the ledger in their pockets. Some of them said nothing at all, and emptiness became the threat. She learned the rhythm of their visits, the pause on the second stair, the creak before the last step, the way the hallway stilled its breath whenever their shadow fell across the door. She would brace herself, smooth her hair, and open. She did not tremble where they could see it. She would stand with the gentleness she had perfected, gentleness not as weakness, but as a quiet boundary. "He isn't home," she would say. "He is looking for work." Or, "He will bring what he can by Friday." The words were small boats she launched into a hard sea. Sometimes the boats floated long enough to buy another day. One afternoon, rain struck the windows as if trying to get in. Her brother had gone out, saying he would come back with news, with something. She folded linens that did not need folding. She waited for the kettle to sing, took it off before the whistle, as though she could keep the house from calling attention to itself. That was when the knock came. She knew the sound of it, deliberate, like a judge's gavel. Yet this time there was a steadiness she didn't recognize, an absence of hurry. She opened the door. A man stood there, older than the others. He did not look past her into the rooms, did not peer like a vulture into someone else's nest. He simply met her eyes with a composure she found strangely disarming, as if he already understood how this conversation would go and had no desire to make it cruel. Rain beaded on the shoulders of his coat and did not dare run. "Is he home?" he asked. His voice was low, clear, unforced. "He's out," she said. The hallway carried the answer and returned it without judgment. His gaze did not travel over her. It rested near, not on her. "I can wait," he said, "or I can return." There was a courtesy in his tone that felt like a warm hand at the middle of her back, guiding without pushing, present without insistence. She felt a small, unexpected calm open like a window behind her ribs. "You can come in," she heard herself say, surprised by her own steadiness. Perhaps she let him in because the rain was cold, and she had always believed in small mercies. Perhaps she let him in because something in him didn't ring with the brittle impatience she had learned to fear. Perhaps she simply didn't want the neighbors to see any more of her life than they already did. He stepped inside and stood on the mat, careful with the edges of his wet shoes. She brought him a towel without thinking, and he took it with a polite thanks, as if she had offered him a cup of trust. He dried his hands and set the towel, folded, on the arm of a chair. Any other man would have slouched, would have brought the weather with him. He did not. He took off his coat, and the air seemed to arrange itself around his presence, the way a room grows clearer when someone closes a window against the wind. She poured tea. It was a simple act, but it steadied her. The steam rose like a gentle prayer, and the clink of the spoon felt human in a situation that was anything but. She set the cup before him on the small table. He cupped it, not to drink, but to warm his hands, and for a moment they were two people waiting out a storm. He glanced at the books on the shelf, worn spines, second-hand titles, and then returned his attention to her. "I'm not here to frighten you," he said. "I'm here because there is a line to be held. It is my job to hold it." She nodded. The words should have stung. They didn't. Maybe because he had named the truth without dressing it in menace. Maybe because there is a dignity, sometimes, in clarity. "My brother will bring what he can," she said. "I know it isn't enough. I know you're tired of hearing that." She breathed in the warmth from the cup she did not hold, drew it into her chest where something knotted and tried to soften it. "We are not asking to walk away. Just for the distance between today and tomorrow, to be a little kinder." He studied her, not like a problem, but like a person. "Kindness," he said, as if testing the shape of the word. "The ledger does not teach it, but I do not forget it." He set the cup down. "You have been carrying part of this debt with your fear. That is not nothing." She felt her throat tighten. Of all the things men had brought to the threshold of her life, recognition had been the rarest. She wrapped her arms around herself, not in pride or defense, but to hold the sudden relief that threatened to spill. "Fear is heavy," she said, "but it keeps you awake, and waking is better than drowning." A corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile, or the memory of one. He did not reply with empty consolation. He simply looked out at the rain striking the glass. "Your brother," he said after a moment, "has a talent for believing the next turn will save him." "He used to believe that about the sun," she answered softly, "that if he watched the horizon with enough faith it would rise faster. After our parents died, he would sit at the window all night and promise me morning." "Did it help?" "Yes," she said, "not because the sun listened. Because he did." The words warmed as she spoke them, a quiet healing in the saying. Sometimes the heart grows stronger simply by telling the truth without apology. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, hurried, uncertain. Her brother burst in, wet to the elbows, eyes flaring with panic and relief in equal measure. He froze when he saw the man seated, then threw a pleading look at his sister. She touched his sleeve, a light, anchoring pressure. "It's all right," she whispered. "We are talking." The man stood, the chair making only a soft complaint. "I am not here to humiliate you," he told her brother. "But time has been stretched thin. It will break if pulled further." He spoke the numbers, dates and amounts, a clean, careful recital. There was no edge to the words, only the firmness of a boundary drawn where the ground had already started to crumble. Her brother's voice cracked. He offered promises like handfuls of sand. The man lifted his palm, not to silence, but to settle. "I will give you 1 week," he said. "Not because the ledger allows it, but because some things are larger than the ledger. I will carry the risk. Do not make me regret carrying it." Relief and shame collided in her brother's face. He swallowed hard and nodded. When the door closed behind the man, her brother sagged as if the air had been holding him up and suddenly let go. He sank to the couch and hid his face in his hands. She sat beside him, their shoulders touching with the softness of old devotion. "Why would he do that?" he asked into his palms. "Because kindness exists," she said, "even in places where we forget to look for it." She said it for him, and she said it for herself. She felt the truth settle into her chest like a warm stone. In the week that followed, the house seemed to remember how to breathe. She still woke early, but the morning was less grey. She still waited by the window, but the waiting felt like rest, not punishment. When fear returned, and it did as faithfully as the male, she met it the way one meets an old ache, with patience and a cup of tea. She told herself gentle things, because gentle things are not lies. They are bridges. You are safe in this moment. You are not alone in this moment. Breathe. The heart listened and, slowly, obeyed. Her brother tried. He took extra shifts, made calls that humbled him, sold the jacket he loved. Each night he spread out what he had earned, the coins and bills like little islands of intention, and they counted together. She did not say, "It isn't enough." He knew that. She said, "We are moving. We are not standing still." Sometimes healing is not the absence of pain, but the presence of movement. On the 7th day the rain returned, softer this time, as if it had learned how to land without bruising the world. The knock came with evening. She rose, felt the tremor in her legs, and told them to be kind. The door opened on the same man, steady as weather that keeps its promises. Her brother stood beside her with an envelope that weighed far less than it should have. He took it without counting. She noticed that to take an envelope from a desperate man and not count it on the spot is a kind of respect. He slid it into the inside pocket of his coat, as if returning a book to a shelf. "Thank you," he said. Not a victory, just an acknowledgement, level as a horizon line. "It isn't all," her brother confessed, "but it is honest." "Honest is a beginning," he answered. "A surprising one sometimes." He looked at her then, not in inquiry, but with the quiet of someone who recognizes another person's strength even when that person has not yet named it for herself. She felt the gentle weight of being seen, and it steadied her. "Will there be more visits?" she asked, surprised to hear her own voice enter the room with such calm. "There will be steps," he replied. "I will try to make them smaller." He buttoned his coat. "The weather will be worse later. Keep the windows latched." It was such an ordinary admonition that she almost laughed. Instead, she found herself smiling, a small, unguarded curve that loosened something inside her. The house, too, seemed to relax, the way a place does when it recognizes that not every knock means harm. After he left, she stood near the door longer than necessary, feeling the echo of the conversation rest in the hallway like fragrance after a visitor. She could not name the scent. Dignity, perhaps, restraint, a kind of quiet authority that didn't ask to be admired. It had a calming effect that surprised her. She had expected to be shaken each time she faced the people who held her brother's fate in their hands. Instead, this man steadied her. It did not excuse the debt. It did not solve their life. It simply invited her nervous system to sit down and drink a glass of water. Days became a string of small mercies. Her brother found a short-term job unloading trucks. She mended a neighbor's torn curtains, and the neighbor sent back a basket of apples. She stewed them with cinnamon, and made the whole apartment smell like a memory of childhood that had never been so abundant, but now felt possible. That night the two of them ate in companionable silence, the kind that is not empty, but full of a shared, exhausted gratitude. When she washed the dishes, she let the warm water run over her wrists a little longer than needed, and in that simple warmth she felt restored. The next time the man came, he did not knock like a gavel. He knocked like someone who knows a household and does not wish to startle it. Her brother was home. He stood when the man entered, and though his expression held nerves, he did not look as if he was about to fall through the floor. Progress can be as humble as that. They spoke of numbers again, but the talk wove itself through other subjects. The new supervisor at the warehouse, a streetlight that had gone out, the way the river swelled when it rained. It was strange to hear ordinary life brushing against obligation, like a quiet duet where one instrument had always tried to drown the other, and finally learned there was more music in balance. When they finished, the man rose. Her brother went to the bedroom to fetch a paper he had forgotten. She found herself alone with the visitor for a moment that stretched just enough to take a breath and offer it back. "Thank you," she said. She was not thanking him for leniency exactly. She was thanking him for the way he carried authority without turning it into a weapon. "You are doing the work of holding," he said. "That is not small." His eyes moved, not quite to the bookshelf, not quite to the window, somewhere near the space where a home keeps its center. It matters how a house feels. Debts are repaid faster in a place that stays gentle. She thought of all the ways she had tried to keep gentleness alive here, the folded towels, the clean table, the lamp lit before dusk. "Gentleness is a choice," she said. "Some days it is the only power we have left." "It is often the first power we give up," he replied, "and the last we learn to trust." He inclined his head, the gesture small, respectful. Then he put on his coat and stepped into the hall, taking the rain with him. She shut the door and leaned against it with her eyes closed, as if listening to a far-off choir. The house felt different after he left, lighter, not because anything had been erased, but because something had been understood. She went to the window and touched the glass. The clouds were the color of forgiveness. She did not know forgiveness could have a color, but there it was, an ash-blue softness that did not scold or deny. It simply covered the city with a thin blanket and said, "Rest." That night, she dreamed of a bridge. It crossed a river she had known since childhood, but in the dream, the bridge was not of stone. It was made of breaths lined up one after another. Each inhale laid a plank. Each exhale set it in place. She and her brother walked across. On the other side was not wealth, not triumph, simply a wider meadow where the air moved without hurry. She woke before dawn, with peace lingering like dew. She kept her eyes closed a few minutes more to keep the meadow. Healing, she thought, might be just this: a steady crossing made of ordinary breaths, more weeks, fewer knocks, smaller envelopes, but steadier ones. The ledger shrank by inches, and inches are how mountains give themselves to rivers. On a morning washed with pale gold, she took the old curtains down and laundered them. She scrubbed the windows until the sky came in cleaner, as if she had invited light to a table that had been waiting for a guest of honor. Her brother noticed. "It looks different in here," he said, wary of joy but willing to touch it. "It feels different," she answered. She brought him tea that was almost sweet and sat across from him. "We are not the same people we were in the worst days." "Are we better?" he asked. "We are softer where it matters and stronger where it counts," she said. "That is better." She placed her hand over his, and he turned his palm up to hold her fingers, an old childhood motion that still worked. The relief in his face was not loud, it was true. The next time the man came, he brought the scent of late winter, clean cold with a thread of wood smoke. He paused on the threshold, as if waiting for the house to invite him. She noticed details she had not noticed before: the way he placed his coat, the courtesy he offered to silence, the habit he had of listening all the way through a sentence before answering. In a world that had learned to interrupt her, it felt like balm to be given the grace of finishing her thought. They spoke briefly of numbers and of the final stretch that remained. Then her brother excused himself to call the warehouse about a shift change. She and the man stood near the window while the evening thinned. The city hummed below, softened by distance. She could see the river where it bent around the old mill. Lights drifted across it like slow stars. He followed her gaze. "Water keeps its promises," he said. "It also remembers every stone." "Perhaps that is how it learns to sing," he offered, so gently she nearly missed the kindness in it. She turned slightly, surprised by the ease with which their talk had stepped from business to poetry. "Do you always speak like this to people who owe you?" "No," he said, after a small pause. "Only to people who remind me why we built towns in the first place. To gather, to keep one another from freezing." He did not look at her as he said it, and somehow that made the words truer. A hush settled between them, the human kind, not the dangerous kind. She felt again that curious steadiness he carried, as if inside him there was a room with a fireplace and 2 chairs and no hurry, and he could invite someone into that room simply by standing near them. Her shoulders, which had learned to brace at every unknown, forgot for a moment and lowered. Her brother returned with a grin so boyish it lifted 5 years from his face. "Extra hours," he said, showing his phone as if it were a talisman. "We can finish sooner than we thought." The man nodded. "Then let us finish well." He took the last envelope her brother had prepared and slid a card across the table. "When the ledger is cleared," he said, "there will be receipts and signatures. Order matters. I'll handle the paperwork." He glanced at her. "Both of you deserve the clean ending that is owed to honest effort." She touched the card, not to keep it, just to feel the shape of a promise that did not bruise. "Thank you," she said again. Gratitude had become a language that did not run out when spoken simply. After he left, the apartment exhaled like a body set free from a tight band. She lit the small lamp by the window. Its glow pooled across the floor in a quiet gold that felt like the beginning of spring. She stood in it and closed her eyes, letting the warmth gather around her like a shawl. "We're close," her brother said behind her, unable to sit still. "Can you feel it?" "Yes," she whispered. "I can feel it." She could also feel something else, subtler, more private, a tremor of recognition that did not belong to fear. It was not rush or romance. It was the simple awareness of being steadied by another person's presence. In a life that had been all edges and alarms, steadiness is a rare flower. She did not pluck it. She let it bloom where it was. That night she wrote a list on the back of a grocery receipt. It read, "Bread, salt, soap, thank you note." She did not know if she would ever hand the note to him, or if writing it was enough. Sometimes the act of kindness is complete in the making. She kept the paper by her bed and slept deeply for the first time in months, her breath slow and even, the bridge of dreams sturdy beneath her step. Morning came honest and clear. She opened the window just enough to let in new air and then brewed tea. The kettle sang, and nothing in her body flinched. She laughed at the smallness of that victory and honored it anyway. Healing rarely arrives with trumpets. More often it tiptoes in and takes a seat by the window. There would be one more visit, perhaps two, papers to sign, a number that would finally reach 0. She did not imagine parades. She imagined washing the curtains one more time and setting the table with both mugs centered, as if symmetry could bless a room. She imagined the man stepping over the threshold with that old-world courtesy, and she imagined saying what she had written, but not yet spoken. "Thank you for the way you hold a line without breaking people along it." And after that, she imagined something even smaller, simpler, kinder than freedom. A day with no knocks at all. A day where the loudest sound in the house was the quiet turning of a page. She could see it. She could almost touch it. She placed her hand over her heart and told it the truth. "We are almost there. Breathe." The evening he returned felt unlike any of the others. The air was thick with the scent of tobacco and rain, but this time her heart did not shrink back in dread. It lifted, though she would not have admitted it aloud. When he stepped into the room, there was no urgency in his movements, no demand hidden in his eyes. He seemed to belong to a different world, one where time did not rush, one where storms could be weathered with stillness. She realized with a quiet start that she had begun to wait for this presence, to measure her days not only by debts counted, but by the steady calm that entered when he crossed the threshold. Her brother spoke quickly, showing him the envelope prepared with trembling hands. The man accepted it without counting, as he always did, and that single gesture, so small yet so rare, unraveled knots inside her chest. She watched the exchange like someone watching two rivers meet, one frantic, full of broken branches, and the other wide, deliberate, carrying its weight without hurry. When their words ended, silence lingered, and in that silence she felt herself breathe as if for the first time in months. Later, when her brother retreated to his room, leaving them in the half-light of the living space, she remained near the table. He did not ask her to sit, but when he settled into the chair, she found herself lowering into the one across from him. They did not speak immediately. The lamp hummed softly. Somewhere beyond the window, the city stretched and sighed. She lifted her eyes, and his gaze met hers. Not piercing, not consuming, but steady, like a hand offered for balance. She wanted to ask why he had chosen to treat them differently. Why he had not pressed harder, demanded louder, like the others. But the question dissolved on her tongue, because the answer was already there. Some people carry authority like a weapon, and some carry it like a shield. His presence, for reasons she could not yet name, felt closer to the latter. Their conversation unfolded in fragments, like threads weaving slowly into a cloth. He asked about the books stacked unevenly on the shelf, and she told him of nights she read to keep the silence from swallowing her whole. He asked about the plant near the window, leaves thin but still reaching for light, and she laughed softly, confessing it had survived more out of stubbornness than care. These small questions did not belong in a ledger, yet they carried more weight than numbers. Each answer she gave seemed to mend a piece of her own reflection, reminding her she was not only debt and desperation, she was also a woman who read, who laughed, who kept something alive against the odds. She noticed his hands, large, deliberate, resting lightly on the edge of the table. They were not idle, not restless. They waited, as if even his gestures carried patience. In the pause between words, she realized her own hands were unclenched. She had not noticed when they stopped holding themselves so tightly. It was a small shift, but it felt like healing. A reminder that safety does not always arrive as freedom. Sometimes it arrives as the absence of demand. When he rose to leave, she found herself standing too quickly, as if pulled by an invisible thread. He adjusted his coat, and she caught again that trace of cologne, rich and clean, a scent that clung to memory like an anchor. At the door, he inclined his head. "Keep the windows closed tonight," he said. "The wind will be sharp." Such ordinary words, yet they carried the intimacy of someone who had looked into a room and wanted it to stay whole. After he left, she lingered at the door, her palm against the wood, as if she could hold the echo of his presence a little longer. For the first time in many months, the house did not feel only like a cage. It felt like a place waiting to be filled, with warmth, with gentleness, with the quiet unfolding of something she did not dare name. That night, when she lay down to sleep, she whispered to herself the words she once believed she had lost. "You are still here. You are still whole." The words spread through her like the slow unfurling of spring, soft and healing, and she drifted into dreams where fear was not the only companion. The snow melted slowly, leaving behind streets washed pale with water, and the air carried the first hints of spring. She found herself waking earlier, not because the house demanded it, but because her body remembered what it was to rise with light instead of fear. In those mornings, she would boil water for tea, listen to the faint hum of the radio, and breathe in silence that no longer cut. Healing was not sudden, she discovered. It came like the thaw, quiet, patient, unstoppable once it began. He returned again, and with each visit, the walls of the house seemed less weary. He carried no ledger when he came now, no sharp reminder of numbers stacked against them. The debt was nearly gone, though she rarely thought of it any more. What she thought of was the way he set his coat over the same chair each time, the way his presence settled the air, the way her brother's shoulders no longer slumped as heavily when he entered. One evening, after supper, her brother excused himself early, retreating to his room with tired gratitude. She and the man were left at the table, a candle flickering between them. She noticed how the flame reflected in his eyes, steady but alive, like something waiting to be known. "You've kept this house gentle," he said softly, his gaze sweeping the room, the clean table, the folded linens, the plant by the window that now leaned toward new light. "It's all I can do," she answered. "When everything feels broken, I try to make small things whole." "That is not small," he said. "That is what keeps people alive." Her throat tightened. She looked down, tracing circles on the table with her fingertip, and whispered, "Sometimes it feels like I was keeping the house alive more than myself." His silence was not empty. It was the kind that holds space for truth. She lifted her eyes again, and he was still watching her, steady as always. "And now?" he asked. She drew in a long, healing breath, letting it move through her chest like a tide. "Now," she said slowly, "I feel as if the house is keeping me alive." A faint smile touched his lips, rare, unguarded, and it warmed the room more than the candle. Days lengthened. She began to walk outside in the afternoons, tracing paths along the river. At first she went alone, her steps tentative, as if freedom might vanish if she reached too far. Then, one evening, he was waiting near the corner when she returned. He walked beside her to the door without asking, without pressing. The silence between them was not awkward. It was companionable, like the sound of two heartbeats learning the same rhythm. After that, he began to meet her sometimes in the evenings. They would walk slowly, speaking little, watching the river shift in color with the sky. She began to notice the way his presence softened the world around her, the way even the sharp cry of gulls seemed less harsh, the way shadows seemed less heavy. Healing, she realized, was not only something that grew inside. It was also what you felt reflected back when someone stood beside you without judgment. It was on one of those walks that she dared to ask the question she had carried for weeks. "Why have you been different with us?" He did not answer right away. They stopped on the bridge, leaning against the railing. The river moved dark and deep below them. Finally he said, "Because once, a long time ago, someone was gentle with me when I did not deserve it. It changed everything. I have not forgotten." His words lingered in the night air, quiet and weighty. She looked at him, and for the first time she saw not only the man who had carried authority like a shield, but also someone who had once been broken and healed. The thought drew her closer, not in pity, but in recognition. Spring deepened. Her brother's debt was cleared at last. The final envelope had been delivered, the final receipt signed. When the man placed the papers on the table, her brother stared at them as if they were written in a language he had never seen. Relief washed through him, staggering, almost unbearable. He rose, clasped the man's hand, and whispered a thank you too thick with emotion to carry further words. Then he left the room, unable to contain the storm of his own gratitude. She remained. The papers sat between them, a symbol of freedom, yet her heart felt heavier with the thought that his visits might now end. She folded her hands in her lap, bracing against disappointment. But he did not stand. He looked at her, calm and certain, and said, "It is finished, but not between us." Her breath caught. For a moment she could not find words. Then she asked, barely above a whisper, "What is between us?" He rose, moved slowly around the table, and stopped before her. He did not reach for her, did not touch. He simply said, "What has been building quietly all along. Trust, presence, something neither of us can pretend away." She lifted her eyes to his, and the steadiness she found there was unlike anything she had ever known. It was not fire-consuming, not hunger-demanding. It was gravity, gentle, inevitable, healing in its certainty. That night, she went with him for the first time to his home. It was not ostentatious, though it was grander than anything she had known. Glass and stone, light and order, the scent of cedar and polish. But what struck her most was the quiet. It was the kind of quiet that felt earned, not imposed. He led her upstairs to a room that had been prepared long before. Dresses hung in her size. Shoes waited in perfect rows. The bed was wide, dressed in silk, sheets turned down as though for a guest expected, welcomed. She touched the fabric with trembling fingers, overwhelmed not by wealth, but by the thoughtfulness of it. In the bathroom, hot water poured steady and abundant. She stood beneath it, letting it wash over her, carrying away months of fear, years of sorrow. She stayed there until her skin flushed warm, until she felt reborn beneath the steady flow. Healing can come like water, she thought, washing what once seemed permanent into something lighter. When she emerged, wrapped in a robe softer than anything she had ever worn, he was waiting. He stood near the window, his silhouette framed by the glow of the city below. He turned when he heard her, his eyes sweeping over her with a steadiness that did not diminish her, but restored her. "You belong here," he said simply. The word struck her deeper than any declaration of love. Belonging was what she had hungered for all her life, through grief, through fear, through nights spent wondering if she would ever be more than a shadow. And now, spoken with such quiet certainty, belonging wrapped around her like a promise. He stepped closer, his hand lifting to touch her arm. Not rough, not insistent, but firm, grounding. The warmth of his skin seeped through, steadying her heartbeat. She closed her eyes, letting the contact remind her she was alive, whole, wanted. That night, in the bed prepared for her, she surrendered not out of desperation, not out of sacrifice, but out of choice. It was not the end of fear or pain, but it was the beginning of something stronger, the knowledge that even broken hearts can heal when held with steady hands. When she woke in the morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows. He was beside her, his breathing even, his presence calm as always. She lay still, listening to the rhythm of his breath, letting it guide her own. Healing, she thought, might be nothing more than this. Two lives breathing together, steady and unafraid. She rose quietly, walked to the window, and looked out at the city bathed in gold. For the first time in years, the future did not frighten her. It beckoned, and she was ready to step into it. The morning after she had chosen to stay, the house no longer felt foreign. Sunlight stretched across the wide floorboards, painting everything with a warmth that settled gently in her chest. She walked barefoot through rooms designed for permanence, rooms that whispered of stability, of a life built not on fear, but on care. Every detail spoke of preparation. Dresses in her size, perfumes she had once only glimpsed in shop windows, a vanity already waiting with brushes and bottles. It was not improvised. It was not temporary. It was as though he had carved out a place for her long before she had dared to believe she could belong. When he appeared in the doorway, watching her with quiet steadiness, she did not feel scrutinized. She felt anchored. "Does it feel strange?" he asked, his voice carrying that measured calm that had become her new rhythm. She turned, her robe trailing softly against her skin, and whispered, "It feels like breathing after holding my breath too long." He crossed the room slowly, deliberately, until he stood close enough that his presence wrapped around her like a second skin. He reached for her hand, not to claim it, but to rest within it, the way one rests a stone in a river and lets the water decide how to move. She curled her fingers around his, realizing how natural it felt. Healing, she thought, is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is the absence of trembling. Days passed, and she settled into the new rhythm with a mixture of awe and quiet disbelief. Each morning, sunlight slipped through sheer curtains, reminding her that darkness could be outlived. He would join her at breakfast, sometimes speaking, sometimes letting silence do the work. She learned the music of his presence, the pause before he answered, the steadiness in his gaze, the subtle kindness in the way he listened without interruption. They began to share walks through the garden behind the house. It was unlike the narrow streets she had known, filled with trimmed hedges and stone paths that curved toward fountains. At first, she hesitated to step too boldly, as though she were trespassing. But he walked beside her, his hand brushing hers lightly, his pace unhurried. And slowly she realized the space was not a cage. It was a sanctuary. One afternoon they paused by a bed of white roses. She reached to touch a bloom, careful of the thorns. "They're too perfect," she murmured. "Perfection," he said, "is not in the absence of thorns. It is in the way beauty lives alongside them." The words sank deep. She thought of her scars, her mistakes, the nights of shame and fear. She thought of how she had once believed those things erased her worth. Now, standing beside him, hearing his truth, she realized they were part of her story, not its end. Healing came not by erasing the past, but by letting it rest beside the present without poisoning it. Her brother visited often in those weeks. At first, he came with nervous eyes, as though afraid he might see judgment. But judgment never came. The man treated him not as a debtor, but as family, sharing meals, offering counsel. Slowly, the shame melted from her brother's posture, replaced with the fragile beginnings of dignity. Watching the two of them, she felt something uncoil inside her. Forgiveness. Not all at once, not in grand gestures, but in small, steady breaths that said, "We survived, and that is enough." The nights grew warmer, and with them her closeness to him deepened. In the quiet of the wide room they spoke of childhood memories, of fears unspoken, of dreams too fragile to share with anyone else. He told her of his own scars, not in detail, but enough to let her know he was not untouched by pain. She listened, heart open, realizing that love was not built on perfection, but on shared brokenness, carried gently. One night, lying beside him, she whispered, "Do you ever fear losing this?" His hand traced the length of her arm, grounding her. "Fear is always near," he admitted, "but I have learned not to let it guide me. What guides me now is what I see in you." Her eyes burned, but not from sorrow. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the faint tobacco and cologne that had become her balm. For the first time, she believed she could stay without fear of the world tearing it away. Seasons shifted. The garden bloomed, and with it, so did she. She began writing again, filling pages with thoughts she had once locked away. She painted small canvases, not masterpieces, but expressions of a heart rediscovering its colors. He encouraged her without demand, celebrating each small act as though it were triumph. Healing, she realized, is not a destination. It is every small act of creation that proves you are alive. Their love did not roar like fire. It flowed like a river, steady, relentless, carving out new landscapes with quiet power. There were moments of passion, yes, but more than that, there was constancy. He did not need to prove himself with grand declarations. His love was in the way he held her hand when storms rolled in the way he poured her tea before she asked, in the way he listened to her silences as though they, too, were sacred. She often thought back to the girl she had been, the one standing at a door with trembling hands, the one whispering, "Okay," because survival demanded it. That girl still lived inside her, but now she lived beside a woman who had chosen, who had found love not in desperation, but in presence. And each time she looked at him, steady and certain, she felt that choice renewed. Years later, when the world outside their sanctuary continued its endless chaos, she knew their love was not fragile. It was not an illusion spun by circumstance. It was real, built through pain and gentleness, through scars acknowledged and beauty embraced. She no longer whispered to herself at night that she was whole. She no longer needed to. Wholeness had become her truth. And in the quiet of each evening, when the candle burned low and the house wrapped them in its healing silence, she would rest her head against him and feel the simplest, most profound truth of all. She belonged. If you've journeyed this far with her story, if you've felt even a spark of hope, gentleness, or healing within it, I invite you to carry that with you. And if it touched your heart, I ask you kindly, like and subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. It is through your presence that stories like this continue to live, breathe, and heal.